So thank you all for joining with me today. My name is Makda. The purpose and goal of this panel discussion is to create a space where individuals from different ethnic backgrounds can have open, respectful, and insightful dialogue about the political and humanitarian climate the Horn of Africa is currently facing. There is an absence of space for interethnic dialogue, which is a significant root cause and barrier to resolving problems within regions. With that being said, our intentions are to cultivate and normalize discussing conflicts amongst interethnic groups. I think we can all agree this is a much needed conversation, and we hope to exemplify that dialogue can be held within our community respectfully with a mindset of conflict resolution. I will start with Sam. Please introduce yourself and give a little bit of a background of who you are.
Hi, everyone. I'm Samuel Gebru. I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I am a political and nonprofit consultant. I'm also a former candidate for Cambridge City Council in Massachusetts. And I've been heavily involved in local issues here in the US for the last 15 years and also in Ethiopia as well. So it's great to be here with all of you. I'm really excited to talk about the different issues that the Horn of Africa faces and sort of what are some ways out of it. You're on mute.
Thank you. Mastish, do you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. My name is Mastish. I was born and raised in Addis, did most of my schooling there, and then started sort of graduate school and undergrad in politics and law. So that's my academic background. But I have spent also recently a year in Ethiopia with some of the reform initiatives that were launched with Prime Minister Abiy. So I'm really interested in obviously the Horn and Africa broadly, but what we can do to sort of salvage the situation back in Ethiopia right now, the current crisis.
Thank you, Mastish. Mark, do you mind introducing yourself and a little bit of your background?
Yeah, my name is Mark Goydam. I'm based out of the Bay Area, Santa Rosa, California specifically. I have been involved, I guess you could say, with Eritrean activism and focusing on how to kind of make Eritrea a better place. And for building on about 8 years now. And besides that, I'm a registered nurse, a husband, a father, all the basic stuff. And I've also been involved with like local politics and things like that, just trying to make my local community better also. And I guess I would self-describe myself as a Pan-African Eritrean. I've lately figured out that that's the best way, I think the easiest way to describe myself.
Thank you, Mark. Ayantu, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Ayantu. I'm a PhD student, a researcher, and an activist. I live in Los Angeles, and I'm really looking forward to hearing different perspectives. Yeah.
Thank you. And lastly, Andam.
Hey everyone, what's up? My name is Andam Gebrgiorgis. I'm from Mount Vernon, New York, right outside New York City. Mostly been a special education teacher for much of my professional career. Recently, I ran for Congress here in New York City metro area. And as an Eritrean, as a justice-minded person, very concerned by what's happening back in the Horn of Africa. So really looking forward to this conversation with everyone.
Thank you. So I'm just going to dive into the first question. What is your opinion on the root cause of this civil war and the major obstacles being faced within the Horn of Africa?
I think that's a heavy question. I'll start off. So as far as like the root cause of what's going on, I think I would have to say at the very root of it would probably be some form of neo-colonialism. I feel like it's always kind of been into the benefit of outside powers, right, for African people to not succeed. I think oftentimes we hear about all the natural resources that is in Africa, all all of the basically just the potential that Africa holds, but not being able to kind of reach that potential. So in my personal opinion, I would say at the root cause, I think would definitely have to be neocolonialism, because when you look at what's going on in other nations, that also seems to be the case, not just in the Horn of Africa. So I guess that's my answer. And then what was the end of that question? Could you repeat that real quick?
The major obstacles being faced within the Horn of Africa.
Yeah, and then I think due to neocolonialism, I think the major obstacles is trying to figure out how to bridge the divide between people, how to kind of overcome our differences that we either think we may have or we actually do have, and working together to kind of achieve that. So I think definitely that's the major obstacle I think that we face is figuring out our common goals and working towards that.
Yeah, I could jump in here. I think going back to, I guess, what I know more in detail, like the Ethiopian context, I think that what Mark just said about resolving our differences in a civilized way, in a way that doesn't, end up in military confrontation, like what we're seeing back in Ethiopia now, is like the key, I think, problem. And I think a lot of it, at least in the Ethiopian and perhaps even Eritrean context, is having a political system that tolerates differences and has means for them to be sort of moderated in a peaceful way. So not just like a constitution and parliament, but institutions that are kind of germane in this country, but like courts that are independent, and some institutes as part of the executive that can be relied on for some impartial, public-minded service. So just institutions, I think in general, like we haven't built them for decades. There's like, a shift of like one regime promising that and then turning into a authoritarian, dictatorship. So I think the common thread is just an inability to build the institutions that would allow us to resolve our differences, because the differences will be there forever. It's just how to resolve them. So that's what I feel about sort of the root cause.
To add on to that, I agree with Maswell. I think differences are not necessarily bad, right? I think any society is going to have differences. The question is, how do you sort of negotiate with those differences? And certainly in the Horn of Africa, and you could argue throughout the continent, there's a lack of institution building. And to Mark's point as well, it's sort of, you think about the geopolitics of the Horn, it's a very militarized region. It has seen more than its fair share of war throughout the last century, and a lot of instability, a lot of state and non-state actors that seek to destabilize the region. And so there are layers and layers to this. And in addition to all of that, correctly said, Mark, there are, in many of these contexts, there are colonial borders. There are long unresolved ethnic and religious disputes. I mean, even Ethiopia, which we oftentimes proudly say was the only country in Africa never to be colonized, the reality is that it is also an empire that expanded and also shrunk through brute force. And so, it's not like everybody sort of was just living under happily under the sun. So there's some nuance there. Yes, maybe it wasn't colonized by a foreign power or a Western power, but there was indeed conquest among what is today Ethiopia. And so there's so many layers to this, and I just think that a lot of this just has to deal with unresolved grievances and the reality that instead of the politics of possibilities, the politics of reconciliation, what we like to do in the Horn of Africa often is the politics of personalities and quite frankly, the politics of annihilation. And so instead of finding ways to bridge differences and instead of finding the ways to celebrate and embrace the ways in which we differ, it usually comes down to a zero-sum game of power. And for me to have power, I have to eliminate you.
Okay. Okay. Can I just jump on that point? I think that both all of you have touched on really important points, so I don't want to repeat them. But I do want to reiterate the unequal relationship that developed after the late 19th century, when the power dynamics in the Horn of Africa shift completely, as they did in the rest of Africa with the scramble for Africa carried out by European states. And I think that we have not addressed that fundamental loss of sovereignty and autonomy for people who were previously independent and then who were incorporated into the state in Ethiopia. I'm just speaking about Ethiopia right now, and who continue to be disfranchised and systemically subjugated. Sam used a really good term, politics of annihilation. This is like our whole political approach in Ethiopia is about annihilating communities one at a time, gradually. There are communities that are continuously subjected to the state's impulse of annihilation, and it never stops. And I think that, and whenever there is an opening, what Mark is talking about, about neo-colonial, Ethiopia is a neo-colonial entity from the way I see that. I don't think it's any different than any other African country in that sense. And when there is opening for change, you'll have, say, the US or another neo-colonial power will then come in and put in power their own people and sustain that dictatorship and that authoritarian government, even at the expense of millions of lives of people. Abiy Ahmed is a good example. He has started 2 wars and he still continues to benefit. He still continues to be a benefactor of the goodwill of the international system. So the international system is a big part of our problem as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll jump in on the last point, where I think that it's interesting in the sense of all African states of how the states broadcast power, how they're able to assert their sovereignty, assert that power throughout the boundaries of the state, and then what does sovereignty look like in a lot of these states. In the context of the Horn of Africa, I think it's interesting both on a national context and regionally, and then also in terms of how we engage, we meaning these Horn of African states, with regional apparatuses and international institutions. In the context of this conflict, we're going back to the beginning of November, right? Abiy is saying that this is a national issue, right? And that for the African Union, right, we have to think about this in terms of, non-indifference, right? Are we going to invade? There's going to be, crimes against humanity. Well, Abiy's like, no, this is a national issue. Even though we know that this conflict is automatically going to be internationalized because of refugees moving across the border. And then when you think about Eritrea in this context, Eritrea from the very beginning is looking forward to, this is my own opinion, Eritrea is looking at this and the opportunity to internationalize as a benefit to their ability to broadcast state power and assert their authority and concretize that power within the PFDJ regime. So when we're talking about obstacles, I think root causes and obstacles, they feed into each other. There's no sort of line where it's like, oh, this was the cause. And no, this is a continuous process, because in so many of our countries, particularly in Ethiopia, where there's always been this sort of challenge, as many of you guys have already said, with sort of subnational groups being able to have rights within the country and be able to sort of assert their power. I think we're going to see these issues for a very long time, especially when COVID ends, when we have this new slate of national elections in Ethiopia. Well, what's that going to look like after we have this huge war?